for. So let's start the interview.
It's Jock from Firefall, and Tea Natick is a wonderful room because you can have coffee and cookies, which a lot of clubs don't afford. But you, it's just a beautiful room in Natick, and it's to the west of Boston, so you get a different audience than your usual Boston crowd.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know that Boston is a unique, totally unique place and place to play, unlike any other city on the East Coast. It's great.
Well, in the old days, Jock, I used to book a lot of clubs here. The Paradise in Boston, the Channel. I had the two major clubs, but Paradise is still there. All these new clubs have opened up, and I'm not even very savvy on them because that's not what I do for business anymore. I'm just so amazed that there's the MGM at Fenway Park and these nightclubs around the corner, and bands like yours can play these amazing new places that we never dreamed of 40 years ago.
Yeah. When you were talking about Fenway Park and stuff, the first time I ever played in Boston was probably in 1973 with Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris in the Fallen Angels. And we played, I thought I was going to remember the name of the club, but, in Boston I think I flew home to Denver from Boston. It might have been the last day of that tour, of the Fallen Angels tour. But hey, nice to talk to you. I'm in Colorado. It's gorgeous and in the 80s today here in Denver, Colorado area.
Well, it's a little cloudy here. But did Club 47 or Passim? Were those the clubs?
No,
because those were the big folky clubs.
I can remember a few of the names of the clubs, but that might have been in Cleveland or Philadelphia. We hit it pretty hard on that tour, a bus tour with Graham and Emmylou and the Fallen Angels. But Firefalls, we haven't played in New England that much. And the truth is that you're only worth as many butts as you can put in the seats. And unless we get a nice package like what we're doing here, we haven't played as headlining in Boston area too much. But this gig is going to be great with Pure Prairie League, ourselves, and Richie Furay from Poco and Buffalo Springfield.
That's a terrific lineup.
Yep.
You know what I would like to do is talk about the new album. You know about Barbra Streisand's last album and new album, right? She's got her friends on it.
Oh, I don't.
Yeah, so I think Barbra Streisand and you guys should package the 4 albums. Family and Friends of Barbara and Firefall. I mean, why not? And then do a track together. Have her sing "Just Remember I Love You."
Yeah, now that'd be great. Somebody covered "You Are the Woman" once, and I think it was kind of a country person. But anyway, our 2 new albums. Well, Friends and Family came out in late 2023 and was happening in 2024. And then I was asked by our manager record label to do another one, a volume 2, Friends and Family 2. And the concept, for anybody who doesn't know, is my manager said to me 2-3 years ago, Jock, the original guys in Firefall played in a lot of other famous bands, like the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers, or Spirit and JoJo Gunn, and in my case, Graham and Emmylou. He suggested we do an album of just their material. And I went, well, that's a great idea, but let's expand that. I was always thinking bigger. Let's expand that because in 1976, when our first album came out and hit so big and went gold so quick, and we were suddenly touring with all of these bands, I said, let's do a song by Fleetwood Mac, the Doobie Brothers, Loggins and Messina, Leonard Skinner. We used to tour a lot with Skinner, and he said, that's great. So then we had to, once the concept was set, I had to carefully pick the songs, and of course, like if you're thinking about the Doobie Brothers, there's 20 songs you could choose from. Which one is appropriate for us to do a respectful, loving cover of, So I'm really proud of these two albums. And for the first time in Firefall history, we did two albums back to back of other people's songs.
So the band, you must have played with the band to do Chest Fever.
We did. And again, I thought, somebody immediately said, "Hey, let's do Up on Cripple Creek." And I went, no, that's Levon. I wouldn't want to do that one. Same thing with when we were trying to think of a heart song, somebody said Barracuda. And I went, oh no, that's the Wilson sisters. I don't want to, and so we had to find a song. And I've always loved what you just named by the band. It's like, oh, Chest Fever. Oh man, their first two albums, their first album and then the Brown album, oh my God. And I got to meet Levon one time backstage, for about 10 seconds, but like, what a hero of mine.
And that's a great pairing because you have the band with the earthy sound and you have Firefall with the pop radio hits. And I think that's a really nice balance for the audience.
Yeah, it was. And the thing is Firefall really is a not so much earthy, but acoustic vocal based, mid rock song. No, we're not a rock band or anything, but for so long, I've had to contend with people thinking that Firefall was only You Are the Woman and Just Remember I Love You. And we were way more than that.
Of course, but you have the fans and you have the people that appreciate good music, and then you have the people that listen to top 40 radio. And they're a different breed. They don't look at the 45 covers of who produced it or who wrote it the way a lot of us do. And, know the nuances of each group.
Sure. Have you heard the Firefall, the Friends and Family 2 record?
I was listening to, I reviewed it actually and sent it to your record label.
Oh, good. I didn't know that, but yeah, and, on Stephen Stills' Love the One You're With, we've got Wynonna Judd and her drummer husband, Cactus Mosier, my good friend, playing on it. And kind of historic on when we chose the Buffalo Springfield from our past, roots, what song I knew immediately I wanted to do Mr. Soul by Neil Young, which I remember hearing that in either a junior or senior in high school, probably a senior in high school in 1968. And Neil's lyrics, were just like in your face, didn't make any sense. And what is he talking about? And it didn't matter. I learned right then with that song that it only really matters what the vocals sound like, and sure, you want to have words that mean something, but sometimes, nonsensical words. So anyway, the historic thing was I asked our buddy Richie Furay from Buffalo, Springfield, and Polka, who lives up in the mountains from Boulder, if he would come down and sing on Mr. Soul. And he ended up singing the exact harmony vocal part with me in 2024 as he did with Neil Young in 1968. It was like, wow. No, Rich.
Oh, yeah. That's nice stuff. And, Wikipedia says about Mr. Soul that Neil was pretty blatant about taking the Stones riff, Satisfaction, and, elaborating on it.
Right.
And you do a great version. I like what you did. So
thanks. And to have, Richie on that. And for me, as the lead guitar player in Firefall, and the producer of these two records, I wanted to keep a lot of the songs right in the pocket, like what you expected. Like on Dan Fogelberg, I learned Dan solo, and I figured this is what everybody knows. I'm going to play it, and I'm sure it's a little bit different, but I learned Dan solo and played it religiously. Way to go, Dan. And then on Simple Man from Lynyrd Skynyrd on our first Friends and Family album, those three lead guitar players, like back in the 70s, were the hot guitar players of anybody, and I just I didn't even listen to any of the licks on that. I just kind of played it with Lynyrd Skynyrd in my brain and my heart. And it's really cool because the Friends and Family albums stick to the song like you expect. And then some of them stray away with maybe some new instruments or something.
Well, see this T-shirt I'm wearing is strictly by coincidence. It was
Huh.
funny. That is a artwork by Ron Wood of the Stones.
All right. He's great.
Yeah, and that's Rob Fraboni, their producer for Bridges to Babylon.
Huh.
I don't know if you met Mr. Fraboni ever.
No, I'm an artist too, and I went to a Ron Wood art gallery showing.
Yeah,
and
I did
he
too.
was really busy talking to everybody else, and I went, no, don't do it. And I didn't, hi, I'm Jocko Firefall. It's like, yeah, that to Ron Wood is like, but yeah, he's a great artist. And, and I'd had an art showing a month or two before at that same venue. So they invited me down. And I went, oh boy. Yeah. Ronnie Wood of the Stones.
But this has to do with your new album. So here's the fun thing. I sent Sail on Sailor to Rob Fraboni because that was his first hit.
Wow.
He was the producer of the Beach Boys. He's not credited, and Blondie Chaplin's not credited, the singer, and Carl, but four of them produced Sail on Sailor, and it was Fraboni. So I sent it to him today to get his reaction of your new version.
And what was it?
Well, he had to take his daughter to the airport. So.
Oh, okay. So you haven't heard yet.
No, but the thing is, I'm doing a documentary film on Rob.
Oh, cool.
Keith Richards introduced to him, which brings me to, I was managing Jimmy Miller, the Stones producer.
Uh-huh.
I want to go there because Jimmy was with the Stones, and Stephen Stills come running in, and they heard for like the first time, I think of anyone, the cassette of Love the One You're With. So Stills played it for the Stones and Jimmy Miller. And I put that in my review because now we're going to go a little further. Wikipedia says that, what's his name? The keyboard player for the Stones, Billy Preston.
Oh gosh.
They said Billy Preston came up with Love of the One You're With, but it was my friend Doris Troy. Just One Look?
Right.
Stephen Stills called Doris and said, I miss my girlfriend. And Doris said, if you can't be with the one you love, honey, love the one you're with. And he wrote the song, but it was Just One Look, Doris Troy, who came up with the title.
Wow.
She was a dear friend of mine before she...
There's a lot of great stories out there in the world about it. I'd never heard that.
And
well, too, because, we were going to do Stephen Stills song, and that seemed the obvious one, Love the One You're With. And I did listen to it, and you notice right away, there's no drums. It's the late great Joe Lala on percussion and Stephen with his percussive acoustic guitar and no drums. And I said, well, we're going to have drums. And, and I knew Cactus, the drummer, Wynonna's husband, who I was in a band with many, many years ago in Boulder. Cactus is a hard hitter, and he hits them. And I went, and I asked him to play on it. And after he played on it, I got the nerve and I said, do you think your lovely little wife, Wynonna, would sing some stuff on this song? He said, you bet. Her producer, I know, is going to love that idea. And I went, great. And he said, of course, I'm her producer. But anyway.
It is superb. And what I like about it is the fact that you guys did a polished, great version of Love the One You're With, where Stills did this amazing, like, quasi performance and production. And it's just, it's not Phil Spector, but it's certainly a wall of sound of Stephen's making that I thought was brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you guys took it and make it what it should be for commercial listeners today.
Huh. Well, I appreciate you saying what it should be because, when you start out one of these songs, it's like you're a painter and it's a blank canvas in front of you and you know kind of what you want to do. But as soon as you start adding, brush strokes, oh, that's different. I like that. Hey, blah, blah, blah. So we didn't know how that was going to turn out. But once I got Cactus on the drums, I just went, oh, yeah. And Stevens, he's a magician, man. The songs he's done, in the past. Wow.
And, there's something about these great songs like I Need You, America. I don't think the kids today, I think that one slipped through the cracks from history. Back in the day, we all know it from the radio, but I don't think these kids today understand how great it was, and you bring it back to life.
Well, thanks. And that's one of the few that I thought that I'd sing, that I could sing. I'm the low voice in the trio singers, but my two lead vocalists on these two albums, Friends and Family 1 and 2, Stephen Weinmeister, who's been in the band for 20 years, and the newest member, John Basaha, amazing lead vocalist from California, who also is in the band The Babies, and he's a great singer. And I was
the band with John Waite, the Babies.
Yeah, so John Waite quit, and they got a different singer, and then my John joined, and he's been in the Babies with his wife being one of the girls' Babies singers, for like 10 or 12 years, and they don't play too much, so John's doing two bands, but he's such a great vocalist, and you can hear him on those albums really good. But I just figured those guys are great. I was content to be the producer and have them sing everything because they're so together.
Where do you record everything?
We, this one we made in Colorado, where I live and where Firefall resides, although John is from Nashville and our drummer Sandy lives in Oregon. So we meet up for gigs and play gigs. But I had 2 or 3 studios, really good studios that gave me a rate. And, when it came time to make this new Firefall Friends and Family 2 record, I contacted Coop Studios in Boulder, was the main one, but also Far and Away in Boulder. So we used Colorado studios, and, I've been in it a long time. I know how to make records.
So I'm going to swing back to the past, and then we can talk about the new album again. But what was the demo that got the deal for Firefall with Atlantic Records?
Interesting. Of course, Firefall has all the Flying Burrito Brother, Graham Parsons, Chris Hillman, Michael Clark, Byrds, Burrito Brothers, Rick Roberts from the Burrito Brothers. And some of us, Rick Roberts and I, and a little bit Mark Andes, would go out on the road with Chris Hillman as the Chris Hillman Band from the Byrds. And we play all the Byrds songs, and I got to play Rock and Roll Star, and wow, isn't this fun? This was it was before Firefall hit it big for sure. It was like in the year or two we were getting together. And, Rick and I started really thinking about Firefall and what we were going to sound like, and, that first album. And it was amazing. And Rick, once Mark got into the situation and we were like, okay, we're Firefall. Rick, I'm backtracking a little bit. Rick said, I know this guy, Larry Burnett in Washington, D.C., who sings and writes great. You want to hear a song? And he plugged in on a reel-to-reel machine. The first song we heard of Larry's was Cinderella, and Mark and I go, oh, get him out here. And when we made, in our first week of practice, before Michael Clark was in the band, but in our first week of practice with Rick and Larry, the singer-songwriters, and me and Mark, the players, me on guitar and Mark on bass, we had 20 to 25 original songs of Rick and Larry's to work out, and many of them ended up being a year and a half later on our first album. So that first week, and I mean, we knew exactly what we were going to sound like. It was like, and then Michael Clark got in it, and when you added Michael Clark, the King of 4/4, the drummer for the Byrds, with Mark Andes, who was this LA bass player that was not a country rock bass player. He was very inventive and fairly jazzy, and you put my guitar playing on top of that, it just sounded like Firefall from the first week of practice. We had all the songs, it was like 25 songs to work out, and we're just going, what else you got? And Rick would go, how about this one? It was amazing. So our sound came very naturally. And the most amazing thing about it is that we had all the songs to start with. Because, when you start a band, you don't know what songs you're going to play and what are we going to sound like. And okay, we need to get a singer or, whatever. Bands that's starting out, Firefall was kind of a different animal, and it led to that first great album. And suddenly we're touring with Fleetwood Mac and Rumors and stuff. You're going, wow.
That is pretty heavy. So you had those songs. Was there an A&R man that picked up on it, and you sent them to, or how did that work out?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. You asked about how we got to Atlantic.
It's my little tag, the demo that got the deal.
Right. So anyway, the demo that got the deal, we knew that with Michael Clark and Rick Roberts and Mark Andes in the band, who were big recording artists already, we knew where we wanted to head. And Chris Hillman was the producer of our first 3-song demo tape. And I don't even remember what the songs were. 2 of them ended up being on the first record a year and a half later. But Chris Hillman, and Warner Brothers paid for that. And Warner Brothers we sent them through Chris Hillman the demo tape, and they went, nah, we'll pass. And all of us went, what? And the manager went, okay, let's go to Atlantic. I've got people in Atlantic. And we just happened, we were, the 3 of us, Mark and Rick and I, were touring with Chris Hillman when he got sick, and he found out he was sick. We played from Boston and then went to New York. By the time we got to New York, he was sick, and his doctor said, you've got hepatitis, go home. And we quickly offered, well, we're in a band called Firefall. We can fly Michael Clark and Larry Burnett out for the gig tonight or tomorrow, and we can do the 3-night stand. And we had a gig because Chris got sick in New York City, and the manager called, all the bigwigs of Atlantic, and they came down. And after the first night, they said, we'll be talking to you. They came the second night. I think the only guy from Atlantic that didn't come was Ahmet Erdogan, who we got to know later. But they signed us 2 weeks after they saw us in New York, and all that demo tape of Chris's and then seeing the band live, they went, okay, we're good.
That is fortuitous.
Fortuitous, exactly.
Yeah, that's just an amazing story. The Cars opened for friends of mine who became Tom Dickey and the Desires on Mercury, but the Cars opened for Fox Pass, and the Cars got signed by the manager, and the rest is history. But it's interesting how, the labels are coming to see the headliner, but then they pick up the Cars.
Right.
And
every story is different, and you think about other bands and, talking about the band, with all those guys and, the Allman Brothers. I mean, everyone has a different story, and Firefalls was really fairly charmed, and I feel like we were destined to be at that right place at the right time. And me too, with my guitar playing skills, but I wasn't writing any songs then, but I found Rick and Larry, and and I know that when you listen to those first 3 albums of Firefall, both me on lead guitar kind of dominate the track a little bit, and then David Muse on sax and flute, and that was an integral part of. But it's always been about the songs. You got to have the songs.
So, do you want to hear a story about I Got a Line on You?
Sure.
I mean, with all the hats we all wear, I was managing Spirit for 10 minutes, ran to California, right?
All right.
I got him his biggest show here in Boston in years, 2,000 people for WBOS. It was a big deal. And Randy said, I want to get I Got a Line on You with AT&T. That was what he wanted. And so I said, okay, I'll get on it, Randy. And I started, pitching for him for an advertisement. And then we turn on Saturday Night Live, and there is Budweiser with I Got a Line on You. And I call Randy because 3 hours difference, right? It's 9:00 in LA.
Right.
And I go, Randy, Lou Adler got your song to Budweiser before we got it to AT&T. He was crushed, but hey, he still got an advertisement. And he had me call Budweiser. They were really cool. They said, yeah, Joe, it's real secretive. We're all searching for the right hit for our product. And I had a good talk with the Budweiser guy, but, it was an interesting experience. So,
wow.
I've never met Mark Andes, but that's great that you have I Got a Line on You on the new CD.
Right. In fact, we used to play I Got a Line on You in our set in the years leading up to that when Mark was still in the band. Randy, California. There's a wow.
It was Randy and Ed with the bald head.
Yep. And Mark.
Yeah, they knew
John Locke and Jay Ferguson.
they knew Harvey Warfield, the big #1 DJ in Boston, who was also my business partner. So we brought Spirit to Avalon. But then a couple of years later, in '94, I brought Randy and Ed, and they had a third guitarist, real nice guy, bass player. And we had a big free concert right in Boston at the Boston Public Library. And it was about 2,000 people for Randy. It was great. So, yeah, it was just nice having the band back then. But this is your interview, and I love.
Oh no, I'm loving it, and it's interesting how everybody knows about the migration of people like Joni Mitchell and Neil Young and Don Henley and Glenn Frey to L.A. And whenever that was, but not too many people realize that probably starting in the late 60s and early 70s, a lot of people moved to the mountains above Boulder, Colorado. Stephen Stills, Dan Fogelberg, Joe Walsh, Richie Furay, on and on, about Carl Wilson from the Beach Boys, and Boulder kind of became this center of attention for 2 minutes. And everybody's story is different. And Firefall and me to have played a small role in that 70s thing, that's just great.
Oh, I don't think it was a small role. I think it was a significant role. And I love like the Streisand stuff. She's amazing, singing with Paul McCartney and different people on the new album. And it's mirroring what you guys are doing. And I think for the people that enjoy music, it's a wonderful reflection of the important songs in a reinterpretation.
Right. And I really kept that in mind as producer on this because, there's a lot of 30 and 40-year-olds who never heard any of those Doobie Brothers songs, or they're not familiar with the songs of the late 60s into the mid 70s and the late 70s.
It's hard to filter that these people born in the 90s weren't there in the 70s with us. It really is, the Jefferson Airplane? And they go, no. And I'm like, what? You don't know the Jefferson Airplane?
Okay, Jefferson Starship or Starship. Nope, haven't heard of any of them.
So here was what I wrote in my review, too. It would have been great if Marty Ballin were alive to sing on Sailor, because we were trying to get him to do that, and there just wasn't enough time in life. We wanted Marty to sing Sail on Sailor, and I thought, wow, Firefall and Marty Ballin, now that would have been really nice.
Wow. That would have been really cool. So when it came time, we used to tour with the Beach Boys all the time in the 70s, the original band. And, when it came time for a Beach Boy song, I went and I just immediately discounted anything surfing. Although now I'm thinking it might have been fun to do one of those good surf songs. But in fact, it was our manager who said, how about Sail on Sailor? And I went, oh, yeah, which is cool because that wasn't a big hit for them. Not like they'd had. It was a hit, and it was many years later, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Monty Chaplin singing. He's
Yeah.
a keyboard player for the Stones.
Right. Anyway, that one was a fun one. And, for instance, a few times, like I wanted to do another Fleetwood Mac song on the #2 album. And in my mind, just like Barracuda with Heart, Fleetwood Mac, Go Your Own Way was kind of untouchable. That's like one of, Lindsay's very best songs. And I kind of thought, nah, we shouldn't do it. But the singer, John Basaha, said, I could sing the heck out of Go Your Own Way. And I went, okay. And then we did Go Your Own Way. And I think our version of that, and it's all really, really, we're honoring not only the song and the band, but the 70s. It's like there will never be another decade like the 70s where record labels, had their hands off. And if you had songs, they'd put your album out. And if it started getting some play, they'd push it, The 70s was so diverse and just so great.
And that was a good choice, too, because a lot of the stuff on the Fleetwood Mac albums, Rhiannon, of course, way overplayed on radio. And maybe that doesn't matter today, 50 years on, but I still think you picked a good song from that era.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm hearing really good reports back from people like you all and fans going, I love the song selection. And it's interesting because, I'll be talking to one interviewer and he will focus on one song, and you're focusing on two other ones. And it's just like, what a great thing to be able to pick and reproduce and lovingly put out there some of the best songs of the 70s by great artists like Fleetwood Mac and Loggins and Messina, etc.
Well, and you take something like I Need You, America, and you put a different guitar spin at the very beginning. It's very airy, it's very nice, and it's not America. So you pay tribute and you get your own Firefall sound. And
Right.
that's really nice about the album.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. I appreciate that. And yeah, like I said, some of the times, I wanted to, I want to put a accordion on this song, and people are going, what? And so I had John Magny from the Subdudes play accordion on it and everything. It's just so much fun making records. And, I'm a fortunate guy to still be doing it here in my 70s.
Now, forgive my ignorance, perhaps. Did you and Emmylou and the band have a record out back when you toured?
Graham Parsons had a record out that the unknown singer Emmylou Harris, who was discovered by Rick Roberts later of Firefall and Chris Hillman in a little club in Washington, D.C. And Chris called Graham and said, I think we found the gal singer you're looking for. Graham had an album out on Warner Brothers, the country album with Emmylou Harris, using Elvis's backup band, James Burton on guitar, and their first gig in Boulder, they realized that their guitar player was not doing too good, and he got drunk that first night because he was so nervous. And they looked around Boulder, and the club manager called me and said, you should come down here. I'll bet you have a gig. And it turned out that I did. I auditioned the next night and got taken on a 1.5 month long tour. It was like, wow.
That's a pretty cool story.
So here's the cool story. First gig we played in at the Armadillo headquarters in Amarillo, Texas. And our second gig, I think a 4 or 5 night stand, was in Houston at Liberty Hall. And I'm playing on stage with Graham and Emmylou playing country music, doing my best to try to play James Burton, and onto the stage walks Neil Young and Linda Ronstadt. And it was the first time Emmylou Harris and Linda Ronstadt ever met or sang together. And they sang harmonies and everything. And Neil Young invited all three bands, Neil's band, Linda's band, and Graham's band, back to his hotel. And when we got to the hotel and doing mass quantities of everything and drinking heavily, Graham immediately picks up a guitar and starts strumming, 15 country songs. And Emmylou Harris and Linda Ronstadt sit down about 5 feet away from him, face each other, their faces together about 4 inches apart, and put their harmony vocals to what Graham was singing for about an hour. Graham was just playing all these George Jones songs and everything. And Linda and Emmylou were like, oh, and the people that were in the room that night were just like, oh my God, listen to this.
Where was the tape recorder?
No kidding.
That's Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Buddy Guy all playing together.
Yeah.
Did anyone record it? No. It's like, wow, but that's magic. That's magic you just brought up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, of course, nowadays we got our phones and we can, hey, hold that a second, but yeah, that's part of the magic because, and I can even remember kind of what Linda and Emmylou both had on. Emmylou had this big blousey thing on and, and because to think that was the first time they ever really blended their voices together was like unbelievable. Here comes Dolly Parton.
Oh, wow.
No, that what she wasn't in that.
No, but that's still a good, I didn't realize it was the first time they sang.
Yeah. They met that night. Oh. Unbelievable.
So you got a book in you.
I do. And I've actually I'm a really lazy writer, but the more interviews I do and come upon a cool story about something that people goes, that's great. And I'm going, I better write that one down.
Well, here's what you can do, because I'll put this interview up on YouTube.
Okay.
And down when you hit more on YouTube, it does a transcript now of this interview.
Oh, wow.
So when you can go to all your interviews on YouTube, and what I do with mine, they're not perfect, but you get the transcript. So instead of me doing 15 hours of typing, it cuts it down to 3. So
Right.
I mean, it's still an art. You have to go over every line. But so if you go to your interviews and start collecting them, you can
Hey,
download the transcripts,
right.
and then I MP4 the YouTube, and I archive them. And that way we have everything we're doing. So this interview, you can grab your Emmy Lou Linda story
Right.
and your demo
Now,
about the deal and all that good stuff,
right. I got one more for you.
Go for it.
Um, I've told Rick Roberts that I was born to play lead guitar on his song Mexico on our first album. And every night we play, we pretty much end with Mexico, and I can just blow and be the, powerful, tasteful lead guitar player I am. Well, when we were going to record my Mexico, they had the track done. And the day before, they had added the mariachi horn section in the middle of my solo. So are you ready to go? And I'm out there ready to play. Got my old Les Paul on and my super reverb, and it's just sounding great. And I'm going, let's go. This is sounding great. And people are in and out of the control room in Miami at Criteria Studios. And so they push the red light, and I start playing. And I didn't know exactly what I was going to play, but I'd played it live, 30, 50 times by then, so I was just rocking, being a right-brained lead guitar player. And, it came time for the solo, and I'm playing my solo. I'm going, sometime, the horns are going to start soon. I don't know what they're going to do. And oh, there they are. And I'd stop, and then the horns would play, and then I'd play, the horns would play. And then I finished it off, and it ended up being a one-take performance. And the producer went, God, that was great. Come on in. And I went, Jim, I had no idea what I was going to do when the horns played. Can I listen to that? I'll bet I could just beat that section. I wanted to, replay something. And he said, no, it was great. Come on in. I said, no, Jim, really, please. I didn't know what I was going to play. And I don't, no, it was great. Come in. So I take my guitar off. I walk in the control room, and the first person I see is my guitar hero, Eric Clapton, who's been watching me play great.
Whoa.
And I went, oh my God. And I, so I turned into Jackie Gleason, kind of crawled over to him. And he stood up and shook my hand and said, keen playing, man, and left. It's the only time I ever met Eric Clapton, but it's a good thing I didn't know he was in the control room before I started playing.
And you got to take with Eric watching. It's kind of like a blessing from the gods. I don't know.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, and all lead guitar players do it. I mean, I stole every Eric Clapton lick off of his records when I was in high school and college as I could learn. And I, oh, that's great. And a lot of those things you learned from other guitar players from records when you're growing up get included into what you do. And I have a feeling that I played a few of Clapton kind of licks, and there he was. So that's one of the amazing musical stories of my life, to be sure.
And for Eric, he's hearing sounds that he might not even know that he inspired.
Yeah. Yeah. And, amazing. That was what was so amazing about recording down in at Criteria in Miami. Because the Bee Gees were across the hall, and then Stephen Stills would be going, you'd run into him in the bathroom, and it'd be like, and so Firefall, the unknown band from Boulder with all these great songs, we made it. And right across the hall from us, the Outlaws were making their second record, and it was just like Star City down there.
Oh, that's amazing. So when you're on tour, do you have anyone specifically recording or videotaping, or do you leave it up to the audience to do their phone thing?
No. And, if we had it together and maybe we're on a slightly larger plateau in music, we should record all the time. And the vocals now are as good as they've ever been live. And, and we're rocking. And, I'll take your suggestion. We should start really, setting it up to where we're going to be recorded from the board every darn night. Good idea.
Here's an interesting thought. You know what public access television is?
Yes.
Yeah. So in Natick, there's got to be Natick public access. So you alert them and say, hey, you want to come down with 3 cameras and tape us and to get a take from the board. And, Bev came in Beverly. We got the Sons of Cream. I knew Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, and now their sons are touring doing their music. So for me, I did 4 interviews through John Lappin. Thank you, John Lappin, for the Jock interview. He's such a great guy. But the Sons of Cream, we did a 5-camera shoot with the public access station. And it's just a great way to capture it because they hadn't taped themselves.
Right.
And like, how could you guys play? They play their father's songs, but they play them their own way. So they're always jamming like Clapton would, and they're making different sounds each night on the same old songs.
Right.
You got to tape that stuff. So we got one concert on tape, but and I'm a big proponent of public access. So if Natick TV came out to TCAN, they do it for free.
Wow.
And then you get yourself like a 3-camera shoot and say, hey, we'll let you tape us, we'll let you air us on the TV, but we want the original tapes. And they mail them to you, and then you got that document.
Right. Wow. You're the man. Great idea.
We just, documentarians, we TEFT, tape every friggin' thing. That's our motto. We just, turn the cameras on. I'm glad we're doing Zoom rather than.
Yeah. Hey, I got it figured out finally.
Yeah. And so that's just my 2 cents because your work is important. And I think the live versions are nice companions of this album. And heck, if you got 4 or 5 shows recorded, you could do a DVD by taking the best of all those.
Right.
Tapes because you're going to be different than what you did on the record.
Right.
It just happens, I think.
Oh, yeah. Now, I definitely want to make our vocals and the 2 other singers and me on the bottom sound as much like the records as we can. Those vocals need to be spot on every night, like the records, because that's what people are paying money to come here.
No,
a vocal band.
That's a given.
And, and the chords of the song are the same and everything. But it's so great to have myself and now Jim Waddell on saxophone and flute, who replaced the great late David Muse, who died. We have total freedom to go new places at times, and of course, when the solo for Just Remember I Love You comes on, by God, I got to play the solo. I have a couple of those signature solos that have to be played the same every night. But then there's Mexico and Living Ain't Living to where, hey, let's go experiment.
So when you play to different cities and towns, are there the same fans that show up for every show, A, and B, do you see any differences in the audiences? Like, wow, playing in Arizona is different from Boston because people react this way. I don't know. I'm just asking.
Right. Not so much your last statement, but yeah. And, there's, Texas crowds or California crowds, are lower key, and just really, and they appreciate in a different way. It's just great touring all over because we have fans, all over the place. But what I've noticed sometimes now, in 2024 and 2025, in my 70s, that there's a whole slew of 20 and 30-year-old people in the audience, sometimes on a date, and they're singing all the words to our songs, which they weren't even born yet. And that just tells me that they grew up in a household where their mom and dad listened to the Eagles and Dan Fogelberg and Firefall, and so they got, so to see a couple of 30-year-olds, out there singing, all of our songs, the lyrics has been like, wow, that's pretty cool.
David Pomeranz wrote a couple of hits for Barry Manilow. He's huge in the Philippines, and I guess he's got a gold record there, and that's pretty phenomenal. Are there countries where Firefall is more appreciated than others in Europe or South America?
Well, I don't really follow the world radio market anymore, or try to pay attention to see if, we would get a lot of airplay in France and in Holland and stuff like that. But then, and the reason we never really toured that much internationally, other than Japan, Hawaii to Japan, was because, we weren't, Firefall, and when people ask that, young people, the band Firefall, no, never heard of it. You Are the Woman, never heard of it. Oh, okay, you're a really young one. But it is great, and audiences around the country are fantastic. And I think just at the bottom line, it's that they love the music, and music being the universal language, music makes people happy anyway.
This has been a terrific interview, Jock. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Anything else you'd like to say out there?
No, but be sure to check out Friends and Family and Friends and Family 2, our last two albums of some of the best other songs by other artists in the 70s. And because I got asked the other day in an interview, so you're going to do a number 3, Friends and Family? And I went, no. I mean, 25 songs was great. It was great picking them and doing them and everything. But we're already starting work on new Firefall songs to be on a Firefall record. And my manager said, because we sometimes go out on the road and play Firefall acoustic with the trio, Stephen and John and I, 2 guitars and a bass and acoustic guitars in a more acoustic setting. He said, you should do a couple of your hits like Strange Way or Just Remember I Love You in an acoustic version, and we'll put it on the new album. I went, bingo, that sounds great. So we're making a new Firefall record. And again, I know how lucky I am to be, an old guy in the music business, and we will have made 4 albums in the last 5 years.
That's Bobby Hebb, the great man who wrote Sonny and Natural Man, 2 Grammy winners, only had 3 albums.
Yeah.
In his life. I mean, why didn't they give him a 20-album deal? The guy, he recorded albums, but only released 3. And it's like, and you've got 4 in the last 10 years.
Yeah. And the fortunate thing there is our manager in LA, who manages 3 or 4 other 70s bands, and the Smithereens, who was an 80s band, he has his own record label. So it was just like, he suggested, hey, make another record. Okay, we're on. It wasn't like having to go shop to Warner Brothers Records again, the big boys. And, record labels are kind of obsolete now anyway, with all the listening and downloads and everything.
It's a crazy world. My final question is a request. If you can dig up the demos that got the deals and a lot of the demos, that might make a nice box set, or
wow,
a second disc to the new album, like the Cars did. They had the Cars first album, but then they put the demos second.
Wow, yeah. I'll have to ask Rick Roberts. He may have a copy of that, and I've got tapes, and I'll have to go look through stuff. That's a good idea. You're the man, the brainiac.
The Cars referenced the demo that got the deal when they put the demos up, because Greg Hawkes was one of our first guests. We did this on 93.7. Remember Kirk Gowdy, the big sportscaster?
Sure.
He owned a radio station. I was the producer, and Harvey Warfield was the DJ. And that year, in 1991, we launched the demo that got the deal. So Greg Hawkes and I, the Cars, because he's an old friend, I knew the Cars way back when. And we went in the studio and cleaned up the demos, and Harry played them. But then Maxine, the DJ that discovered them, referenced it in the liner notes, the demos that got the deal. I thought that was so cool.
I got to know Elliot a little bit when we played a gig in Mexico, and it was,
Creedence
15 or 20. No, it was in Puerto Vallarta and it was a 3-day festival, and the Cars were one of the bands, and Firefall was one of the bands, and
oh wow,
Dave Mason and all the Starship, and it was like hanging backstage. It would be like, hey, Mickey Thomas, there's Elliot, hey, and in fact, after one of the shows, Elliot and I picked up 2 acoustic guitars, and Mickey Dolenz was there. And he was sitting at the bar, and we said, "Come on over, Mickey. We'll do some monkey songs." And he went, "Are you kidding? No." So we looked at each other and said, "Well, let's play some Beatles songs." So that was easy. And then suddenly Mickey's right in the middle of us. Okay, Beatles, here we go. And for about 2 hours, we played Beatles songs in Vallarta, Mexico.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. Man, this has been a fun interview.
Thank you. It has been.
Yeah.
It has been. And thank you so much. And keep rocking, buddy.
Yep. And thank you, John Lappin, again. Have a great day, Doc. Thanks.
Thank you. Do it again sometime.
Yes, please.